Hi Year 10 Maths General students. Today's lesson is looking at the statistical process. How can you effectively compare data, and the lesson objectives are to review the statistical measures we've covered so far in terms of graphical displays, measures of centre and measures of spread, and then how can we use these to apply the statistical analysis process when we have to evaluate, analyse, interpret and compare data, because a lot of the times we have to report on findings. During that process, I'm going to demonstrate to you how to use your Casio calculators to help with statistical calculations instead of doing them by hand. Okay, in terms of graphical displays, when you're using these to help analyse your data, the important things are using the shape. So can you talk about the distribution in terms of width and spread? Can you look for skewness, symmetry, etc., presence of possible outliers, and any modal information? So typical graphs I've put around here, we've got a histogram, and you can see a potential outlier over here. You can obviously see the modal information right here. You could comment that it's a symmetrical type formation. And then underneath here, I've just looked at how you can identify those things on other types of graphs. So for a stem and leaf, symmetrical, kind of tilting your head to the side and seeing that it follows that pattern of symmetry. An easy way to spot that is just to draw a line over the top of it. For a right skewed stem and leaf, you'll notice that the values are pushed towards the lower values, or the other way of saying it is a positive skewed. A left skewed or negative skewed, you'll notice the values are pushed towards the higher values. Histograms, same pattern. Again, if it helps, draw a line over it so you can see positive skewed, push towards lower, negative skewed, push towards higher, symmetrical, nice and even. With your box and whiskers, symmetrical, if you split it in half, one side looks like the other. Positive skew, you can see that the box is pushed towards the lower values. Negative skew, you can see the values are pushed towards the higher values. Moving on to your measures of centre analysis, it should include calculations on your mean. So remember, the mean has the symbol of the X with a little hat on top. You're provided with that formula on your formula sheet if you get a bit stuck remembering it. And your median, otherwise known as your second quartile, and your mode. So you should make sure that those things are calculated for your measures of centre. So remember that your mean can be used to comment on the average value of scores. The median can be used to comment on the centre of scores. And both the median and the mean can be compared to each other to help support skewness claims. And we know that mode's used to comment on the most common score value. So just reminding you what I mean by comparing the mean to the median. So if the mean value you find equals the median, the data will show a symmetrical distribution when graphed. If the mean is less than the median, the data will show a negative skew, so higher values are favoured. If the mean is greater than the median, then the data will show a positively skewed distribution. So we have values that are favouring the lower values. When you're analysing your measures of spread, you should include calculations on your range. So remember, that's the highest score minus the lowest score. And this can be used to comment on the width of the distribution. So if we have a narrow range compared to a wider range of values, that's something we can talk about. You should talk about the IQR, interquartile range. So remember, that's the third quartile minus the first quartile. That also helps support width of distributions. So a low value IQR will have a narrow distribution, so you can visualize it on that box and whisker plot there. A high value IQR will have a wider distribution between the Q1 and the Q3, as you can see in this box and whisker plot. Remember, we can also use the IQR to identify outliers. So just remembering to do that, you need your Q1 and your IQR to work out the lower fence, and your Q3 and your IQR to work out the upper fence. And you're also given that formula on your formula sheets. The IQR can also be used to show the scores between the middle 50% of the data, and also support claims on skewness of distribution when you display it on your box and whisker plot. So again, just showing you the Q1, Q3 pushed over into positive skew, negative Q1, Q3 pushed over to the high values in a negative skew, and a symmetrical should be nicely placed within the box and whisker. Finally, the 5-number summary is best displayed on a box and whisker plot. So when you look at it, our minimum, Q1, Q2 or median, Q3 and highest score or maximum. And it's a good visualization on the distribution of your data. And remember, you can display outliers with a dot or a cross. When you start talking about what your results are showing, remember you can use particular words to describe your observed trends. So for example, if I use the word consistent or precise, you could use that to describe data that has like a narrow spread in your distribution. So that means your values are really close to the mean and median, your range is small, and your IQR is small. Another example, you could say, if you're talking about improvement in results, if you're comparing two sets of data, you'd see that your mean and median before compared to your mean and median after to favour improvement would get better. So for example, if times decreased in swimming laps, you're improving. If the length you jumped for long jump increased with the mean and median, you could say you were improving. And you'd also see a shift in the skewness of any graphical displays that you developed. Another thing to note is when you're calculating the measures of centre and spread, the best way to summarise it is to put it into a table. We're now going to look at a little bit more in depth in terms of the statistical investigation process. So this usually involves 2 or more groups, and the whole process should involve some sort of question. So what's the aim of comparing it? Like a focus question. What data do you have to analyse? When you're analysing it, make sure you summarise and display the answer to the question. So identify your type of data being analysed, use frequency tables if you need to, always provide graphs, and always include all of those calculations of measures of centre and spread. And then after you've finished analysing the results, come to a conclusion by interpreting your results in the context of your focus question, and then communicate what trends can support what you're seeing, and does it help support what you're trying to answer in your focus question. So now we're going to do an example to just demonstrate how you would apply this statistical analysis process. And the example we're going to look at is that'll always be like a complex familiar type scenario. This one's based on a shoe store. Shoes R Us have 2 stores. Number of sales made per day at each store over a 15-day period was recorded, and the results are displayed in the back-to-back stem and leaf plot shown below. The owner of the store wants to hire a casual employee to help out when the store gets busy. Our job is to help the store owner decide which store he should send the employee to using mathematical reasoning. So we've got our stem and leaf plot to analyse, and if you scroll down, you should be able to see that I've tried to demonstrate how you would summarise all of those components that you're going to be analysing, including your calculations. And the other thing that we'll do today is show you how to use your calculator to process these statistical calculations. Much easier than writing out long-winded calculations. Obviously, that's still a skill you need to retain, but for the purposes of data analysis, we want to do it quickly, so we're going to use a calculator to help us. Okay, so before we move on to the calculator, we're going to have a look at both stores in terms of their shape and make some comments on what we're seeing there. So to help, I would always draw a little line over each store, so it helps us visualize like the spread and also whether there's any skewness in the symmetry of the data. For the West End store, to me, you can see that values are pushed towards the higher values, so I would make the comment that this would be negatively skewed. For High Street, it seems pretty central and has a symmetry about it, so I would say that this shows a symmetrical distribution. Okay, so I'll pop that information into my table about the comments on distribution. The next thing I need to comment on is any modal information. So if I have a look at the stem and leaf plot, the modal column in the West End, we have two. So the 70s and 80s are the modal columns. Whereas in the High Street store, we just have one. And that's in the 60s. And if I look for any potential outliers, I can't see any in a High Street store, but I do suspect that in the West End store, this might be an outlier. And obviously I'll need to prove that later by using my interquartile range. So you'll notice that I've filled in this interpretation and comparison points. This is a great place for you to summarize what your findings are telling you. So in terms of distribution, West End has more variation in sales because it has a wider distribution compared to High Street, which is more narrow. West End sales are negatively skewed to higher value sales than High Street. West End have higher modal sales in the 70s and 80s than High Street, and West End has a potential outlier. Moving on to calculating our measures of centre, this is where our calculators really come in handy to help us do all of those calculations. Of course, you can calculate it by hand, but I'd like to show you how to use your calculator to do that. Okay, so if you open up your calculators and if we go to mode, so press mode, and you'll see an option here to stat. So that's our statistical functions on our calculator. So we select that. What we're interested in is one variable statistics. So it's just saying we're analysing one lot of data, which we'll put in the West End stuff first, and then we'll do it again for the High Street store. So you select one VAR, and then to input your data, you simply type in the number and press equals to move to the next bit. So for West End, I'm inputting 21, 42, 47, 55, 56, 62, 65, 71, 76, 78, 83, 85, 85, 96, and 97. And it tells us it has 15 days of data, and we can see that we've filled in 15. So we know we haven't missed anything. From there, the calculator's now stored it. So if you press the AC button, and then to access our statistical values, we press Shift and 1. So above 1, you'll see Stat. So that's what we're accessing. So Shift 1 pulls up the stats we can grab from our calculators. The functions on the calculator from that we're interested in is option 4, VAR, just talking about our variables. And you'll see there, N will tell us how many values we're analysing. 2 will tell us our mean value. 3 and 4 we're not interested in at the moment. They're standard deviations, which we'll look at in grade 11. If we go back to the stat menu, the other option we're interested in is number 5. And you can see there it will pump out our 5-number summary for us. It'll give us the min value, max value, Q1, median, and Q3, which is super handy. So the first calculation I'm after is the mean. So I'll access the statistical menu again, and I'll select option 4, and I want option 2 for the mean, and just press equals. So the mean value for West End store is 67.93 sales. To access the median, I'll go back to that statistical menu, select option 5 and then option 4 to get our median, and don't forget to press equals. So my median is 71. Looking at the West End data for the mode, you'll notice that 85 occurs twice and no other score occurs more than once. So my mode is 85. Pause the video and see if you can calculate all of those measures of centre for the High Street store data, and I'll check in with you. How did you go? I got a mean of 61 sales, a median of 63 sales, and it was trimodal. There were 3 modes in the data. Given what we said in terms of the shape, press pause and see if you can come up with some interpretation and comparison points using the mean, median, and mode, and I'll check in with you shortly. How do we go? I said that West End had both higher mean and median sale values. West End median was a lot greater than the mean, which supported a negatively skewed distribution. If you look at the High Street median and mode, they're approximately the same, so that supports your claim on symmetrical distribution. And in terms of the mode, West End had a higher value mode. Let's move on to the measures of spread. So again, we can use our calculator to grab those values for us. Because I still have the High Street data in my calculator, I'm just going to show you how to access that. So in terms of the range, access your statistical. I'm interested in option 5 because I want to know the min and max scores there. I can just read it off the stem and leaf plot, but I'm trying to show you how to use your calculators, so for the purposes of this, we'll check it out that way. So 45 is my minimum. And 76 was my maximum scores there. When I subtract them from each other, I get a range of 31. Moving on to the IQR, again, I want to use my statistical function on my calculator. So selecting option 5, I want my Q3 and my Q1 because my IQR is the Q3 minus the Q1. So my Q3 is 68 and my Q1 is 56, giving me an IQR of 12. Go ahead and see if you can do it for the West End data, if you haven't already, and I'll check in with you. I got a range of 76 for West End and an IQR of 30. Have a go again of what interpretation and comparison points can you think of, and we'll compare. So my points were West End's range and IQ values are larger than High Street's, supporting a wider distribution of scores. Just remember before I was talking about that a larger variation kind of means that things are inconsistent, and a smaller variation or a narrow spread means that you're being more consistent. So really you can say that High Street's sales are more consistent than West End. Finally, in terms of data analysis, we're just addressing the outlier. So we suspected in West End that 21 was an outlier, and we need to check that using the lower limit. So remember that's going to be the Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. When I put those numbers in, I get a lower limit of 10. So because 21 is above that, it means that it's not an outlier because it fits within the acceptable limits. So I wrote, West End has a negatively skewed distribution, indicating there are a higher number of sales per day than the High Street store. This is supported by the modal sales mean and median values for the West End store. High Street makes more consistent sales than West End, which are widely varied. I would recommend that the new casual employee be sent to the West End store. So anything along the lines of what I just said would be fine. Now I'd like you to have a practice at doing this with another set of data. So if you pop over to the practice activity on soft drink machines, I'd like you to analyze that data. So we've got 2 machines, and your job's to assess that the machines are sufficiently accurate in dispensing 1 litre of soft drink into bottles. Your job's to do a comparative analysis and come up with some sort of concluding comment on which machine accurately dispenses 1 litre. And just a reminder to use all of those statistical analysis calculations. Okay, good luck, and I'll post the answer up later on this week to see how you went. Thanks, Year 10s.